You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
I'd be listening to the mainstream media and just be left frustrated on how they covered these stories. They would completely ignore facts just to promote their own agenda. I said, man, I could do a better job than these fools. I should start my own show. So I did. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Freedom Strips. I'm your host, Keaton Tucker. I'm very excited about this episode, and that is because my guest today is one of the people who gave me the inspiration to start Freedom Strips, as well as he was one of my first introductions to the libertarian philosophy. He's the host of the very successful We Are Libertarians podcast. He is, of course, the great Chris Spangle. Chris, thanks for taking the time to come on the show, bud.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
Even though you're wearing a Jaguars shirt, and as a Colts fan, I'm offended.
Oh, well, I tell you what, you've got the one up on us, I'll tell you that much. There's nothing to brag about, especially with this last season. We'll see what they do in the postseason free agency. There's a lot of talk about maybe Nick Foles coming to Jacksonville.
I mean, at this point, bring back Maurice Jones-Drew.
Oh, my God. Yeah, dig him up from the grave. Anyway, so Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm a big fan of the We Are Libertarians podcast. And really with this show, I have a couple topics lined up here. I just wanted to kind of get your feedback as a veteran in the libertarian community. But first of all, why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners and kind of give your background and your story?
Yeah, so like you told me before we started the show, I grew up as a Republican, and I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh and listening to talk radio, and I've always wanted to do talk radio, which is sort of how I ended up doing We Are Libertarians, and I work in radio still. And I got my first job. I was a college Republican president, and I volunteered for a campaign for a Republican named Andy Horning. And he was libertarian, but I didn't know it, and so he started to kind of challenge some of my ideas. I liked what he had to say, and then I went to work for a talk radio station for a fairly libertarian-leaning guy named Abdul, and he really challenged everything I believed, because when I go back and listen to those episodes from 2007, 2008, I sound so ill-informed and stupid that it wasn't hard to challenge me at that point. And I knew that if I wanted to do talk radio, if I wanted to go into this business, then I needed some political experience. And I ended up working for the Libertarian Party of Indiana for 4 years, from 2008 to 2012. Great time, at the founding of the Indiana Tea Party. And, it was just a great time to kind of be a libertarian as people started to figure out what that was. I had become a libertarian around 2007, 2008. And with the help of Ron Paul, to be quite honest, and then had a brief stint. While I was at the Libertarian Party of Indiana, I just kind of thought, I don't know that direct action politics is quick enough, and I had always wanted to do radio, and so I started a podcast while I was there called We Are Libertarians. It initially was to reach out to college students, and when I left the party, I brought the podcast with me. And tomorrow is the 7th anniversary of beginning We Are Libertarians. And then I went to work. I work for a nationally syndicated radio show now, and I basically do for a job what I have wanted to do, what I've done as my hobby. And so I'm very fortunate to live a blessed life that I truly love and enjoy. And, We Are Libertarians basically is I do the show once a week, and then we have an episode just about every day from a group of co-hosts from a wide variety of perspectives on a lot of different issues. We have libertarians that would consider themselves SJWs, and then we have anarchists, and I'm more of I guess, if I could have my way, I'd be an anarchist, but I at this point I'm just more maybe of a constitutionalist, because that, I think, is kind of the framework that Americans will accept at this point. Mm-hmm. But I really, over time, it started as a way for me to learn about politics and the libertarian philosophy. But as we've kind of grown, we've moved more from politics to some sociology to really talking more about how we interact with each other on a daily basis that might bring about a free world and bring freedom in our own lives, instead of just what is the libertarian opinion on this issue. We do a lot of that, but we also talk a lot about how can we relate as people to rely on government less and each other more. So that's sort of where the program is after several different iterations. But it's been a great time to learn. We've grown far beyond what I ever expected we would grow into, and it's so great to meet people like yourself who say, I'm a libertarian largely because I listened to the show and you challenged my thinking and I evaluated my own beliefs, and it's great to hear someone like yourself who had that same experience I had way back in 2005, 2006, when I had my own thinking challenged, and that's really what it's about.
Yeah, no, your show was really refreshing to find, especially at a time where in 2016 I was really starting to question what I believed, especially after the Trump fiasco happened. I'm like, what is happening? What's going on here? I haven't been really paying attention. I heard of the Libertarian Party. I certainly knew of Ron Paul, who is the godfather of those views. And the more I've researched libertarian values, and the more I've researched Ron Paul, and that with the help of your show, that's just helped confirm that this really is where I kind of line up with the most. It just makes the most sense. So do you see, one of the questions I have is, what do you see with the Libertarian Party and the future of the party? Do you see there's a chance of it increasing with their influence in politics in 2020 or 2024? Or do you see maybe the libertarian philosophy maybe invading the Republican Party and having it kind of take over in that way? Because you already kind of see that with the likes of, and I know a lot of libertarians don't really look at him favorably, but with Rand Paul, and with the likes of Justin Amash and Thomas Massey. You see that in the GOP. What are your views on that?
Well, I think you have to be careful when you're looking at Facebook for your opinions on what libertarians like and don't like, because I've noticed that Facebook libertarians are fairly disagreeable about and don't like very much, and that's partly because they don't do much, and so they're very ill-informed because they're very
warriors.
They're very inexperienced. But I think if you're somebody who has been in the trenches and has been a libertarian for a few years and has, I worked with people who were at the founding of the Libertarian Party, and they don't dislike Rand Paul because they look at Justin Amash, Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, and go, instead of one Ron Paul, we now have five. We have people like Mike Lee who are favorable, or Ted Cruz who are favorable to a libertarian argument. And I think what a lot of nascent libertarians don't understand is that if you go back and look at the history of the conservative movement, it really started to coalesce around William F. Buckley and the National Review. And you had guys like Mises, and you had, even Rothbard was starting to write at that point, and Hayek, and they represented this libertarian view of economics. But around the founding of the National Review, William F. Buckley, who was a self-described libertarian, started to elevate voices like Frank Meyer, like Murray Rothbard, even to have a larger voice in the conservative movement, because you had Robert Taft and all those guys, but they weren't libertarians; they were just paleo-conservatives. And so I'm getting off on a tangent, but my point is that when you go back to the 50s, you start to see the growth of this ideology, and it starts to infect Republican politics. Nixon was never he's really kind of the person that built the modern Republican Party, but he was never too favorable to the Goldwater crowd, but he wanted to recruit them. And then the Goldwater crowd produced Ron Paul and Ronald Reagan. And then Ronald Reagan and Ron Paul have obviously produced a lot of people who talk a lot about libertarianism. I mean, when you look at the actual inaction of a lot of it, it's not pure. But there's no way to be a pure libertarian and to serve in government. It just isn't possible. If you want to be a pure libertarian that just stands on principle on everything, then I advise not running for office. Because if you get elected, you're going to have to deal with 250 years of entangled government mess.
Yeah.
But so I think if you take a long view, to kind of sum this up, if you take a long view and look at the word libertarian and the movement really kind of getting started in the 40s and 50s and 60s, look at how much it's blossomed now and how much further we're going to go in the internet age. And I really look at a lot of millennials and what are called Zoomers or Generation Z. They're very libertarian. They generally, like yourself, would probably agree with this. They want to be left alone. They want to keep more of their money. Mm-hmm. They don't want the government interfering. They think it's stupid that the government has as much power as it has. They disagree. Marijuana is being legalized because of people under 40 across the nation. You're starting to see libertarian thought have an impact on much of the United States. Now, there are a lot of things that are not going well, like the security state or an increase in police power, but there are a lot of things that are going right, and it's because people under 40 are generally libertarian. If you look at exit polling in Indiana, for instance, the libertarian candidate got 1% above 40 and 10% in age brackets below 40. And so it's only going to grow. Now, when it's only going to grow in the Republican Party, and I think the Libertarian Party could grow if it wanted to. I have been a Libertarian Party member since 2007. I don't think that I am current now. I have refrained from expressing a lot of my doubts about the party until recently. But I just think that Facebook groups have made it seem like the entire Libertarian Party is a certain way, and it's done such a great disservice to the hardworking people that have built the party, the grassroots of the party, the people that show up at conventions and run for office. And I really wonder if the Libertarian Party can survive the Facebook libertarians who just want to scratch to death any person who doesn't just toe the line. So I think if I were putting my money on it, the Republican Party is going to end up being a stronger vehicle for libertarianism in the United States over the next 50 years than the Libertarian Party will be, which I personally am disappointed in because I want to see the growth of a third party. But I think that the party has no one to blame but themselves because of the way that it conducts itself a lot of times.
Yeah, I actually that was my view of it. Just being a new libertarian myself, just kind of looking from the outside in, it seems like the infection of the Republican Party is a better vehicle because you already do have a senator with libertarian-leaning values in Rand Paul. You have congressmen like Thomas Massey and Justin Amash in Congress right now who are very libertarian-leaning. And I think that as things go on, I'd love to see the Libertarian Party grow, which actually one of the candidates I followed pretty closely just because I liked him so much was Sharp, Larry Sharp over in New York.
Larry Sharp. There were more. Now, here's the thing. There were more Libertarian candidates that were worth your time and money in 2018 than in the 10 years that I've watched the party. I mean, there's no doubt that the party is getting a better base of talent. And I think there are a lot of Libertarian Party candidates that are worthy of support, and so I'm not totally bullish or bearish on the party, but I look at it with more caution. And when I'm talking to my listeners, I never want to tell you which path you ought to take because you need to take whatever path you think is best. But I think there's no denying math when you look at the way that the Republicans and Democrats have basically written the election laws in this country. It's very difficult for an independent or third party to make on a federal level an impact. Now, on a local level, you can have a huge impact, and libertarian candidates have a lot of impact when they run on against those folks. Because I've watched Mike Pence, who's now our vice president, steal ideas from libertarian gubernatorial candidates like Rupert Boneham and turn them into policy when they became governor. And it's just because a libertarian candidate was running against them and raising these ideas in debates and influencing their governance. So I think there's a ton of benefit to the Libertarian Party. I think it's at the grassroots level when people are knocking on doors and running for office. It's not when people are talking about the latest tempest in a teapot in the party on Facebook. That is a complete waste of everyone's time, and it is counterproductive to the growth of libertarianism. Because if you're sitting on Facebook wailing about Bill Weld, then people like yourself who saw Gary Johnson and Bill Weld in 2016 and saw a rational option, people like yourself you don't go, oh, wow, that guy hates Bill Weld. You go, oh, wow, that guy hates me. Yeah. Because people think about things very selfishly. They don't think about...
That's absolutely right.
They're ranting against... Yeah, they're ranting against Bill Weld, but as a listener, as a hearer, as someone who was brought into the party by that ticket, you go, wow, that guy is just not welcoming, and what's wrong with this party? And it turns you off, and people leave the party.
Yeah, it's almost like what you're seeing with the Democratic Party right now, where they're eating themselves alive. It's like, if they had a unified front, they could really, it wouldn't be even a question in my mind if they could take 2020. However, they seem to be eating themselves alive, and it's actually giving Trump a shot. And then you see someone with the likes of Howard Schultz coming in with the independent ticket potentially. And that's an interesting topic from my view. I wouldn't ever vote for Howard Schultz. However, I almost want him to do well. And just because I would like the American people to see that there is the ability to vote in a third party candidate. Like if you actually see a third party candidate, we kind of saw this, not really with Gary Johnson, unfortunately, but if Howard Schultz can get to double digit numbers and actually make a debate, that can actually open the minds, in my opinion, open the minds of the American people to a third party, whether it be, someone like a Howard Schultz, but actually prop up the ability for the Libertarian Party to actually make a move.
Well, people wail against Gary Johnson being so, quote, unsuccessful, but the guy moved the needle from 1% to 3%, which is monumental. He had an unprecedented amount of media attention, and people looked at that ticket who were not libertarian and said, I could see myself voting for them. The Aleppo moment and things like that were absolutely brutalized in the media because they were left out. He was kind of
caught off guard by the question. First of all, they were talking about medical drugs. If I remember correctly, and then she throws in and then she throws in the the Aleppo, and he gets confused because they've been talking about medical drugs this whole time, and it just seemed like he got caught off guard, and they just took advantage of that.
Right. The tribalists on both the Republican and Democratic side and in the media who don't want to see an outside voice as president seize on those sorts of things. And I've said to libertarians, you need to watch how Trump is treated because outsider presidents, when they are elected president, people like Bill Clinton, he was very much an outsider. Go watch the Clinton affair on, I think, A&E. You'll see the parallels between Donald Trump's presidency and Bill Clinton's presidency. And you see how little Washington establishments on any side don't want an outsider president, and they will do everything they can to keep an outsider president from making headway, and that includes, the polling to admit Gary Johnson into the debate. They're only polling people over 50. Of course, Gary Johnson's not going to hit the 15% threshold if you're rigging the poll. So it's not hopeless. It just means that we have to convince more of our friends that it isn't hopeless. There are definitely things that are against us. Like you look at Howard Schultz, and you look at the people screeching to keep this guy from running as an independent. Well, those people are party tribalists. Like those people are a very small number of people who have influential voices. But there's millions of people who can make a statement at the ballot box if he does run and completely change the system forever. Yeah. Little decisions by singular individuals can make massive changes in a country. And I think you always have to think about every tweet, every action, every vote, every decision as if it is a very significant thing for you and for the people around you. If one CIA person who is in charge at the CIA doesn't have so much pride and arrogance that if they had been more humble and been more willing to work with the FBI, 9/11 would have never happened. but one individual at the CIA kept the FBI from getting information that would have led to the arrest of the hijackers as they entered the country, and 9/11 would have never happened. One individual's choice at one moment in time caused 20 years of misery for us.
Butterfly effect.
And so, yeah, so you have to really think about your personal decisions, and if you're voting Republican and Democrat, I think you really have to examine what kind of world you're allowing that by voting for them and saying with the rubber stamp, I approve of how you're running the country.
Yeah. One of the things that annoyed me the most listening to during the 2016 election was if you don't vote for candidate A, you're voting for candidate B.
Yeah.
And that never made any sense to me, but a lot of people get caught up in that kind of thinking. But it is encouraging to start to see these libertarian values increased within, maybe a select few, but within the Republican Party. So with Rand Paul. So one of the topics that I had for us to cover here was Rand Paul actually announced that he was going to vote against Trump's national emergency along with the rest of the Senate, which is likely to prop up President Trump's first veto. It says right here from NPR, it says Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky says he'll vote in favor of a resolution to terminate President Trump's national emergency declaration with regards to the U.S.-Mexico border. Paul's support means the resolution will likely pass the Senate with bipartisan support and could force the president to issue his first veto. Paul's announcement, coming from an otherwise close ally of the president, lays bare the discomfort many Republicans had with the emergency declaration. Rand said, I can't vote to give extra constitutional powers to the president. On Tuesday, the Democrat-controlled House voted 245 to 182 to approve the resolution. Only 13 Republicans joined Democrats to end Trump's emergency declaration. This is a thing that I guess it depends on where you line up. If you're a Trumpian, you're not very happy about this. But Rand and Trump have had an interesting relationship. I was actually talking to my dad the other day on the phone and talking about Rand Paul and Trump's relationship. They were kind of very close, and it's been nice to see Rand talk to Trump about pulling troops out of Syria, ending the Afghanistan war, trying to take these initiatives to end these endless wars. However, he's taking the right approach here. In defying Trump's national emergency, because it is a obvious breach of executive power. But hopefully, I know there were rumors of Rand Paul potentially being a VP pick for Trump in 2020. And then now there's rumors going around that potentially he could run in 2024 in his own campaign. But it is comforting to see him, this kind of consistency in a senator.
Yeah, I mean, I never take much stock in Rand Paul as a presidential candidate because in 2016 he was asked to go meet the Koch brothers, who have unlimited pockets, and he said, "No, I'm sorry, I'm on vacation right now." So he wasn't a great candidate back in. So you're either going to go for it or you're not. But
yeah, exactly. Make up your mind.
Right. So. But Rand Paul, I think, is a much better politician than his father, Ron. Ron was much more unafraid of saying exactly what he believed, and from a more pure libertarian standpoint, he was much more willing to be unpopular. And I think that Rand probably saw the alienation that caused his father. He didn't get committee assignments. He didn't. He was a hero to people like us, but to the majority of the world, he was a joke. He wasn't taken seriously. And so Rand has at times frustrated me, but I think he has all libertarians, but I think it's because he's playing politics, and we didn't want, Ron Paul never played politics. I mean, he did, but not as overt as I think Rand does, who will say, I'll support that nominee, and it's just like the most overtly unlibertarian person, like, oh yeah, William Barr's great. I don't know if he supported William Barr, but there's been several people that Trump has nominated that he supported, and you're just like, ugh. Yeah, I know. But so he plays the game because he understands fundamentally that politics is about trading this for that. It's a negotiation.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't give something, then he's not going to get something. And so with Trump, I think he's been smart because Trump has some very non-interventionist impulses, and he does whatever the last person said he ought to do. And so if Rand Paul can be the last person in the room, then Lindsey Graham bemoans him poisoning his mind, which has actually been not near is almost a quote. I mean,
yeah.
So I think Rand has been frustrating but effective, and that always drives libertarians crazy.
Yeah,
but
yeah. One of the things I wanted to get your input on as well. He recently just announced some new legislation. So I'll read a little bit covering this. Senator Rand Paul announced legislation Tuesday morning that would end the war in Afghanistan and give a $2,500 bonus to those who served in the war on terror. The war in Afghanistan started in October 2001 and is the longest war in U.S. history. So far, the war on terror has cost the American taxpayers $6 trillion, with an annual expense of $45 billion in 2018 alone. Beyond the financial cost, around 3,200 American lives were lost on the battlefield, with 20,000 who were wounded. Senator Paul argued that while he supported going to war after the attacks on September 11th, he believes that the battle is won. He doesn't believe Americans should stay in the Middle East to continue nation building. I wanted to get your opinion on this bill.
I'm 100% for it. I think the war has gone on long enough. I'm in a very different place with my foreign policy than I was in 2003. I supported the Iraq war then, and I absolutely would not now. I think I would have, I probably would have been like Rand Paul, softer on Afghanistan, but I would have voted against the authorization of military force that has just given them.
Well, I think if you wouldn't have supported the war, you would have been a very small minority of the population. A vast majority of the country supported going into Iraq.
Oh, absolutely. Ron Paul, my Congresswoman Julia Carson, her grandson Andre is my representative now. She didn't vote for it for those reasons, and Cynthia McKinney, I think, and these are people who were not considered the elite. But I look at the Afghanistan war. If you really want to know what's going on in Afghanistan, there's a great movie with Brad Pitt on Netflix.
Yeah, I saw that. I wanted to watch it. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's basically the story of Stanley McChrystal, who Obama fired after some critical comments in Rolling Stone. But it shows you the absolute absurdity of the current quote-unquote war in Afghanistan. And there's like Max Boot, who is an absolute tool, who is supposedly a Republican who criticizes Trump all the time, recently got in hot water for saying that this is just the cost of being an American now. We are an empire, and we keep the world, keep the peace in the world, and it's our duty to stay in Afghanistan. Well, that's nonsense. We don't have peace in the world because the United States military has 159 bases in 159 countries.
Yeah.
We keep the peace because the world has nuclear weapons. And so the idea that we need these international bodies and that we need the United States military to be spending $6 trillion over 20 years, it's ludicrous. It's an absolute falsehood.
Yeah.
And people in the media who love to go to the parties with the people who work for the Council on Foreign Relations, because there's certain organizations that like the Brookings Institution, the Council on Foreign Relations, the World Economic Forum, the Bilderberg Group, like it's not conspiratorial. It's the people who are in power meet together and enact the legislation and policy that comes out of these think tanks. Mm-hmm. And, when a Republican presidency comes in, AEI drains out and Hoover drains out, and they all go to work in the administration, and then all the Democrats go to work for the Center for American Progress and the Tides Foundation, and then they all switch, and it's basically just an employment laundering system for all of their bad ideas. And so we have this continuing set of ideas that started under Woodrow Wilson that have been carried forward by the Wilson Center, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Brookings Institution, and they perpetrate these myths that by leaving Afghanistan, the world will be less safe. That's just not true. We have done all we can do there, which hasn't been much.
Yeah.
And we have just drained, we have exploded our debt. We have killed American men, innocent Afghans, and women, American men and women. I mean, it's just at this point, you look at the foreign policy of the United States and you go, what is American about this? There's so much of the government that if we actually understood the Constitution, then we would look at things like this, or like the declaration that Trump is trying to pass for the national emergency, and we would go, no, this is not the American system of government. We're not going to do this anymore. This is a perversion. But we don't learn the Constitution, and we're not really taught the Constitution on purpose.
That is one of the things that's so frustrating is seeing, well, like someone like Rand Paul getting the ear of President Trump and really kind of expressing or actually reminding him he actually ran his campaign on ending these wars, ending the war in Afghanistan, getting out of the war in Syria, these endless wars that are just spending trillions of dollars. And it's actually encouraging to see that, but it's also frustrating because you've got the likes of John Bolton and Mike Pompeo whispering in the ear of Trump to, well, now you see them with the talks of Venezuela, potential military action in Venezuela. But it's the thing about Trump, the thing that's encouraging about Trump is he's almost so transparent. He says things like, you know, why do we even need NATO? You know, the Cold War has been over. We don't even need to pay for them. And he's like, you actually start to think like, well, you know, what's wrong about that statement? You know, a lot of people attacked him on that statement. It's just like, but it's true. The Cold War ended in the 80s. Why are we funding this system that is oppressing this system that has ended?
Yeah. Well, so Donald Trump is every talk radio caller that I ever screened when I worked at the now defunct WXNT. Like, I mean, Donald Trump says things about immigration that Larry from the East Side used to say. Like, He is our first talk radio president, and there's good things and bad things about that. And one of the good things is that he questions the established order, and they hate that. I mean, it's not like Bill Clinton, who was eager to become the political establishment. Donald Trump has an interesting personality quirk in that he was never accepted by the New York elite. And he has always had a chip on his shoulder about not being accepted by the very people that he beats up. And it's why it eats on him that the media doesn't accept what he's doing, that the Council on Foreign Relations crowd, the dinner circuit, the people who, you know, if you've read This Town by Mark Leibovitz, where, you know, they're at Tim Russer's funeral, it's the people who went to George H.W. Bush's funeral. All those people hate Donald Trump.
Yeah.
All those people have known each other for 40 years. All those people have worked together on projects for a long time. They're not evil people. They're perpetuating a system that isn't proving it isn't giving us the results that we need. Mm-hmm. I think there may be some evil people in the government, but by and large, I just think that it's full of people with wrong ideas. Like, I don't think Ocasio-Cortez is an evil person, or Bernie Sanders. I just think they believe things that aren't rational, and I think they have bad ideas.
No, I think you're absolutely true. Yeah, I think what you're saying is absolutely true. I think if you legitimately tested Ocasio-Cortez and put her on like a I don't know what do you call the lie detector test? The litmus test or something along those lines?
Yeah, just
like a lie detector test.
Lie detector,
she would actually believe what she's saying. I don't think that she's got this evil, nefarious way to kind of lie her way into having these systems put in place. I think she actually believes that these are the right direction to go, and these are the right things to help people. They're just completely terrible ideas that would just completely wreck the United States as it is today. And then,
well, and
I think,
and that's the thoroughly persuasive argument that libertarians make. These are all evil people that know what they're doing, and like people just don't buy that. And you yourself probably I really like George W. Bush. Well, when a libertarian comes along and starts trash talking George W. Bush, even now you may go, ugh. And so when you bash Trump, when you bash AOC as evil, you're taking out of the pool of potential libertarians 5 years from now a recruit. And so you have to be careful about assigning motives that you don't know for sure. Like, we know their ideas are bad. You can go after their ideas. You don't need to go after their character. Like Bernie Sanders, it is fair to say he's a hypocrite given his 3 houses, but he is all about the poor and so I think there is an opportunity for libertarians to just recruit more people with better ideas and better persuasion than the establishment or the Republicans or the Democrats. Like we're in the game and we have the demographic shift in our favor. We just need to pull our heads out of our butts and actually start messaging in a way that's actually going to convince people that our ideas and the consequences thereof are better than AOC's. It's that simple. It's not hard. You just have to do it, and people don't like to do work or feel vulnerable by doing what you're doing, which is I'm going to put myself out there. It feels weird. You're just like, I'm going to start a podcast, and in the back of your mind, you're going, yeah, but who the hell said I'm an authority on anything?
I'm not an expert on anything at all. But I think that is one of the challenges for me, and I am guilty of on a couple of my past podcast episodes, we do poke fun at AOC just because it is some low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's pretty easy to do, but you're absolutely right where you can alienate some people by just completely always talking negative about these people. But it is one of the hurdles that you have to kind of get around to, especially when you're talking about the likes of a AOC or a Bernie Sanders. You have to almost you can't really bring numbers and facts into a debate with the people who like these candidates or these political people. So you almost have to, they almost value stories and like AOC, you want to be more, it doesn't matter if you're factually correct as long as you are morally right. It's almost, that's a very difficult thing to kind of, to hurdle when you are trying to convince the other side to what you believe, but you are almost brick-walled as soon as you bring up numbers and facts.
Yeah, we're bad storytellers, but what are the stories that are told about libertarians? It's going to turn into Somalia. The poor aren't going to be taken care of. The vote for a libertarian is a vote for a Democrat. These are the stories that people tell about us, and we never refute. We just get mad at the stories instead of inventing our own stories. That in a society run by a libertarian framework, the poor will be better taken care of because empathy is necessary for a libertarian society to thrive. When I see someone in need, I will then provide for that person in need. I just had an instance where I was just texting with a friend. Somebody has an issue. They don't have money to fix a problem. And I said, how can we do a GoFundMe? My empathy, because I saw a person in need, said, I want to help. How do I help? And what we so often do, we're still living in the relics of the, you saw the rise of the city-state, in the Renaissance, the medieval ages. You see the rise of the city-state. We're now at the end of the city-state, and we're transitioning to a more libertarian future. And people are very uncomfortable with that transition because they don't know how it's going to work. And the reality is that the way that it works is that you care for the 100 people that you see on a daily basis because that's the world. The world for you and me are the people that we come into physical contact with on a daily basis. And if we're lucky, maybe a few people online. But you and I will have this conversation. We will hang up and maybe we'll be good Facebook friends, but we probably will never have, no offense, you seem like a nice guy, but the reality is that we will probably not have an intimate friendship because of the distance. And so for me to have an opinion on how you live in Jacksonville, Florida, And for you to try and force me in Indianapolis to live the way that you'd like is so ludicrous. Like, the idea that a New York presidential candidate needs to have an opinion about a situation in small Florida, or it's like you look at the MAGA kids in Kentucky, like all these people who live in places who will never meet the MAGA kids in the MAGA hats at the monuments have an opinion about them, and we got to do something, and we got to take care of this, and we never stop and realize that the public square is a myth. The reality is that your world is the 100 people that will come to your funeral, and that's what you need to tend to. And if you take the psychic energy from caring about what Donald Trump or Kim Kardashian or Lindsey Graham or Vladimir Putin, you stop taking that psychic energy and giving it to the news, who is manipulating you for their own personal gain, and start giving it to the people in front of you that are hurting, we're going to have a better world. And so I think if we can start telling that story, that's an idea that people go, you know what, I never thought of it like that. It is ludicrous that 535 people in Washington, D.C. tell my kids how to be educated when the 100 people that I come in contact with at my children's school know better than they do. And you're right, you do know better than they do. And all you have to do is take the power back. All you have to do, if you've ever seen the meme, there's like a great meme of 100 people standing on one side of a board, and then the other side of the board is a politician with a podium, and there's a cliff beneath him.
Yeah.
And you have one person turning around and walking away. And that's what we're dealing with here. You have the ability to change the world by the decisions that you make, and the clicks on Facebook, the stories that you read, the TV that you watch, and the attention that you give away to unimportant things instead of investing in your children or having children or donating to a local charity. These are the things that actually make the world better. And I'm just becoming a radical advocate for trying to make your world more free instead of trying to make the country more free, because that's an impossible task for you and I. We will get easily frustrated when we try to make the world more free by electing a presidential candidate instead of getting out and saying, I see a hurting person, how can I help them? I'm here to help you because I'm a libertarian and I believe in empathy. I believe in love as a guiding principle. That's a story that people want to invest in. They don't want to invest in, well, my tribe, if we're elected president, will beat your tribe better than the other. Like, it's nonsense. And so we have to start telling a better story, and we'll get a better result if we do.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The local level is far more effective than anything that the federal government has done so far in its history. I mean, it just makes sense. Your fellow person, as you pass by, that affects you. You know, in your local area, that is really what affects your life. And really, how do you see the change of power getting removed from the federal government to the local level? I mean, I know that you can vote these politicians in, but I think shows like you and the We Are Libertarians podcast are a very important part of kind of expanding these ideas and maybe taking hold of these local elections and these local governments and kind of putting a more focus on, hey, here's how you can actually improve your daily life. People get so frustrated and honestly, they're scared about the power that the federal government has. That's why you see this visceral combat between the right and the left, is because there's far too much power in the federal government as it is.
Yeah, I'm working on this podcast here locally about how Indianapolis grew from a place called Indianopolis into the crown jewel of the Midwest. I mean, we're a city that your city probably has come to my city to figure out what we've done, how we've done it. It's called Leaders and Legends, if you're interested, and it's basically all the people who have held power over the last 40 years are coming on this podcast to tell the story of Indianapolis's growth. And what you repeatedly hear are people who are friends with each other. They are the elite of Indianapolis. But when you actually sit down and talk with the elite, their goal is to make Indianapolis a better place. Yeah, they want a paycheck. They want some personal gain, and they want a good job and a good salary, and they want to network so they can have a better career opportunity. So there is some personal gain to it. But what you realize is literally anybody can have access to that power circle if they just keep showing up. And secondly, the majority of these decisions that have been made about Indianapolis over the last 50 years have been done without thought of, does it benefit my party? It is much more nonpartisan than people think. And so, the city government has grown, yes, and as a libertarian, I have issues with a lot of that. But at the same time, I see it, and I see rational decisions being made as opposed to irrational decisions being made. And it's because people are sitting, there was something called the City Committee that this guy got together in the 70s and 80s. I think it was the 80s. And it was like the up-and-coming politicians that ended up, they became the lieutenant governor. They became the governor. They became the owner of the Pacers. They became these important people in state and local government. But they got together and had breakfast once a month just to talk about their vision of the city and what could be improved. And I've got an idea. And it was Democrats, urban black Democrats hanging out with suburban Republicans and getting along and having fun with each other. And that's the power of local government, because you can have a conversation. Right. And you used to have a federal government small enough that the Congress could do that, but it's not that way anymore. We've had an abdication by Congress of power to the executive branch, and that's extremely dangerous. And so what local governments can do, what we can all do, is start getting more involved in our local communities, take a less aggressive stance towards the quote-unquote elite, because you can be the elite if you just show up to a campaign, start stuffing envelopes, and 15 years later you're a decision maker. I've seen it 150 times now over the last 15 years. It's happened to me. I'm in rooms that I'm just going, how did I get here? And I'm a libertarian, and it's just because I just am nice to people, and I keep getting new opportunities because I'm friendly.
And you took the time, yeah.
Yeah, I took the time to say yes to opportunities when a lot of people say, nah, I don't want to do that. And I think the way that we do it is we start to put our focus on our local communities. We start to take an interest in our local governments, and we stop taking an interest in higher. I'll steal a joke that I heard once. The best way to deal with a problem is to ignore it. That's how I dealt with my first wife. But there's some truth to it. If we just start ignoring, like I have over the last 2 or 3 months, and I know I run a political show, but the last month or two, I've just disconnected from social media, and I've disconnected from the news, and I don't really know what a lot of the conversations are right now because I'm so disconnected. And I've never felt more engaged in my city as a result, because I'm putting that energy into my local community. I've never felt less anxiety about the direction of society than I do right now, and it's because I've stopped letting the people who are paid to scare me, I've stopped giving them the opportunity to scare me. And so I think if we just start walking away from the national media, cable television news, like if you're watching television news, you're having your intelligence insulted and you're being made afraid of something. Like that's just all there is to it. If we stop paying attention to the fights on Twitter, and if we can all achieve a peace of not knowing what the argument of the day is on Twitter, I think we'll all be better off. And so that's how we do it. We have to be intentional about where we put our priorities and our focus. And when you change your priorities and you change your focus, you're going to change yourself, your community, your family, and it's just going to be much more empowering.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what you're saying, Chris. One of the things that I found out about just the other day, over in New Hampshire, there's a program going around called the Free State Project, I believe. Have you heard of this?
Yeah, I have. I've been to New Hampshire. Been to Pork Fest. I've experienced the Free State Project. It's great.
Can you explain a little bit about what the Free State Project exactly is and what Pork Fest is? Mm-hmm. I've heard them in passing in podcasts, but I'm not entirely sure what exactly that is.
Yes, you are becoming a libertarian if you've in passing heard of Pork Fest and the Free State Project. When you are in the Free State Project, that's when you know you might have gone too far. No, I'm just kidding. I love the Free State Project idea. I think it is, I used to mock it. I used to make fun of it. And it is basically a pledge that within a certain amount of pledges. I think like 20,000 pledges. Everybody's going to move to New Hampshire, which is a smaller state, and you can have more, because there's less population, you can have more control in government. There's 400 state legislators, so you can have a great representation of libertarians and anarchists in New Hampshire. So it's a very well-organized movement over the last 20 to 40 years that has basically been recruiting people to move to New Hampshire. And so they have built in, Seacoast, like my friend Roger Paxton, a Lava Flow, lives in Seacoast. He moved there from Arkansas. I went and visited PorkFest, which is kind of the Free State Project puts on a couple great events. PorkFest is like a week-long festival celebration, camp out. Driving to the White Mountains in the summer when it's 70 and sunset and beautiful. It's such a great time. I cannot recommend going to PorkFest enough. I'm disappointed I can't go this year. The Free State, what I found when I went to New Hampshire and I met people in the Free State Project who moved there. I met a lot of guys. I think there's no doubt that men are disconnected from society. They are disconnected from, good mental health. They're disconnected from community, and deaths of despair are lowering our life expectancy. And it's because we've lost community. I think there's a great book called Them by Ben Sass, the senator, that I highly recommend, that kind of explains the loneliness problem. And when you go to New Hampshire, you find a lot of those guys. One guy told me last year, he goes, if I hadn't found the Free State Project, I'd be hanging in my garage, because when I moved here, I found a lot of people that I could connect with around these ideas. I found a lot of purpose in my life. And it's a beautiful thing. So I think if you're committed to the ideas of liberty, I would absolutely take a look at the Free State Project. I personally don't want to move to New Hampshire. I would move to Concord, New Hampshire in a heartbeat if it were always June in Concord.
That's what I'm saying. I'm from Jacksonville.
Right.
I've lived in Florida most of my life. I don't know if I could handle that cold weather.
Yeah. But, I was like, oh, man, I dig this. I could move here. And then I drove by a snowmobile museum, and I was like, oh, no. But, I have been fortunate in that I have, we have a strong libertarian community here in Indiana. I have been fortunate to find a lot of meaning in the community here. I've created my own community. But I think if you're just like an introverted person who's, or an extroverted person, or you're just looking to make more of an impact on a local level, I love the idea of it. But I think we should all have Free State Projects in our own communities if we're not going to move. If you're not going to go and be a part of that project, then you need to start your own where you're at and start building local communities of libertarians that you can just start, making friendships. I mean, so when the society collapses, you at least have some friends, Keaton.
No, yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea,
right.
Chris. No, I really think, as I was kind of hearing about, I can't remember which podcast I heard it on, but I think I heard it on a couple different ones. But that Free State Project idea is a very interesting idea to kind of get more of a libertarian influence on a one singular location.
Yeah,
and really, one of the things to kind of dive back into our topic list here, Trump has been so it says right here, President Donald Trump's reelection is backing a controversial plan to give the government a role in managing America's next generation 5G wireless network, bucking the free market consensus view of his own administration and sparking wireless industry fears of nationalization. The plan, embraced by Trump 2020 campaign manager Brad Parscale and advisor Newt Gingrich, would involve the government taking 5G airwaves and designing a system to allow for the sharing of them on a wholesome basis with wireless providers. The idea is also being pushed by a politically connected wireless company backed by venture capitalist Peter Thiel that could stand to benefit. So it's interesting. You know, I was watching the State of the Union, and Trump goes up there and, you know, he says, and America will never be a socialist nation. And they do the classic zoom in on Bernie Sanders' face, and he's just kind of like, "Meh," you know. But then Trump turns around and does something like this. It's very interesting.
It is fear that the Chinese are going to come in and build the 5G towers and have access to our network. The 5G is the hype around it is that it's going to change all of humanity and everybody's going to have free Wi-Fi, and it's probably all BS. But
I could not help but as soon as I saw and read this article, I could not. I am assuming I know I've heard in past podcasts, but I'm assuming you have watched the Joe Rogan, Alex Jones' latest podcast.
You know, I have been so busy with other stuff that I have not sat down and watched this 4.5-hour odyssey.
No.
But
yeah, that is a long one.
I am so excited too, because while I am not a conspiracy theorist, I am a huge Alex Jones fan. I think he's a great performer. I think he's hilarious.
He's so entertaining.
The memes that come out of it. I mean, Alex Jones, just some of what I've seen is just making me laugh. But no.
Well, I'll tell you.
I know they talked about 5G, and I listened to the No Agenda podcast. They think it's going to fry our brains. Like, there's a lot of, I don't know if it's conspiracy or there's alternative information about 5G that I hear a lot of, and I go, I hope that's not true.
Yeah, no, it actually is. Well, and that's one of the things about Alex Jones that's kind of unsettling is, you know, you sit there and he's so entertaining to sit there and watch, and you kind of take everything he says, obviously, with a grain of salt because he's very hyperbolic. Right. But a lot of what he brings up and is said is rooted in something that has been researched and has been found.
Go read about Jeffrey Epstein and then go, maybe that Pizzagate thing wasn't so far-fetched.
No kidding. You are absolutely right. That is definitely freaky.
Well, that's the thing about Alex Jones is that it's 50% vitamin sales and self-hype and self-promotion, and 25% just absolute nonsense, insanity, and then there's 25% that's just rooted in fact, where you go, is that true? And you go and fact check him, and you go, oh shit. You know, I think. Sorry if you're not allowed to curse, but
no, you're fine.
I'll mark it on the tape so that way you can mute me. But you know, there is stuff like this 5G stuff that you see the conspiracies around it, and I listen. I'm not. I know government power, and I can tell you that the idea of nationalizing 5G, we need to not freak out about it, because what you need to realize is that the government already controls all of it because of the FCC. You know, right. The reality is that if you have a Sprint network and you have an AT&T network, which is what we have now, you know, T-Mobile and AT&T are on one network, Sprint and Verizon are on another. You know, those companies control it, but ultimately they're heavily regulated. I work in radio. You're talking about an industry that's wildly regulated in terms of bandwidth and who can own what and how many stations. And it's, you know, the idea that the private corporations are, hold on, well, my cat is playing with my AirPods, and it's all over now. I'll never see that again. So anyways, my AirPods. I'm sorry to show off my wealth and white privilege to your audience in such a way, but
yeah.
So the reality is that the AT&T and Sprint and Verizon and these companies that own these networks now are so in bed to the government, and so they've bought off the FCC, they've bought off the politicians that regulate them. Like, right. It's a myth that the government doesn't already control it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I just thought it was so interesting, and I know for a fact after listening to you and kind of hearing your views on Alex Jones and how you enjoy listening to him, you will find that whole 4.5 hours to be complete entertainment. You will enjoy it.
Just go look up Deluxe Stereo or Stereo Deluxe did Alex Jones as a folk song, and try not to get that stuck in your head for the rest of the week. Like, I use it as my kind of like lead-in music to test my equipment before every show for our patrons, because I just love it so much. Like, he's such a unique character in broadcasting, and he's built such an amazing as a person who wants to build media networks and does that for a living, like I find him and Glenn Beck particularly interesting in what they have been able to independently build and achieve. So he's just a fascinating human being. Like I think the reality is that people get so wigged out about trying to control what you think that if you really just watched Alex Jones, you would go, "This is bullshit. Like this is nonsense. Like what are you doing?" I just don't need someone to keep Alex Jones from hitting my eyes. I as a thinking adult can watch the guy and find value in what he does, and that it's entertainment.
Yes.
But not necessarily news value that I'll make decisions on. So I just think like the censorship of social media with Alex Jones was such a travesty, because they did what they always do. They picked a target that nobody's going to defend, and they created the mechanisms and the permission to do that. And then it's just not going to stop. It's just going to continue to cascade. And it's like you tweet, learn to code, and then you're gone. It's like Christians may know the name Charles Swindoll, who is this like 70-something preacher, radio preacher, delightful human being. And like I went to his Twitter today, and he has a security check on it. Like, are you sure you want to see this account promotes ideas that are dangerous?
Yeah, I've
basically.
seen that before.
And it was on Charles Swindoll's, like, this is a Christian preacher who says nothing offensive, but probably said something, about homosexuality once, and now you have to hit a gate to see this guy.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, you will get the gate whenever you go to view that profile, but when you go to view Louis Farrakhan's profile,
right,
you don't see any gate. There's no gate there. And it's so interesting. I do watch a lot of, or I do listen to a lot of Joe Rogan's podcasts, and he recently had the one with Jack Dorsey, his second one, since he got some pushback on his first podcast he had with Jack Dorsey, which is the CEO of Twitter. But his second one, he did a second one because he got a lot. It was probably his most disliked on YouTube episode in the Joe Rogan Experience history.
Yeah.
But he went and he did a second episode because of the pushback, because a lot of fans didn't think that he pushed Jack Dorsey enough. He didn't ask enough questions. He's very laid back in his questioning, and he just kind of let Jack get away on a lot of different topics. But on this latest one, he brought on Tim Pool, which was so interesting because Tim Pool did not lay back on the questioning, and he came very prepared with a ton of different examples. And that was a very interesting podcast to listen to, just to hear Jack Dorsey. And I believe he brought on, I can't even remember the lady's name, I'm sorry, but one of his, the lead person in his company that devises the rules. And it was very interesting to listen to that podcast, to give for them to give an explanation of why did they ban Alex Jones? Why did they only lean in a liberal direction on their censorship? It was a very interesting.
Did they have any decent explanations?
I will say this: and Tim Pool said this at towards the end of the episode. He said something along the lines of, "I understand what you're saying. I just don't believe you."
Right.
And it was one of those things where they gave some decent explanations on some of the examples, but on others they totally copped out, and they weren't able to. And even Joe Rogan was very, very much better at pushing Jack Dorsey and his accomplice on this podcast.
That's a funny word. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it really, if you listen to it, it really kind of is. It's almost like an accomplice, and where they actually push them on these examples, and they really aren't able to give a good example. They're just like, well, we understand we make mistakes. That's good. We're getting this feedback right now, and it's just like, well, what are you going to do?
Yeah, I look at the censorship of it all, and I just go, well, who, like, the reality is that what happens, and you saw it with Tim Pool. Like, I saw the meme basically where Tim Pool on the video says, I wish I had the quote, but basically, you support journalists who falsely claim that people are Nazis and ruin careers based on hearsay. And then literally like 5 minutes after that, there was a blue checkmark journalist saying he was a right-wing alt-right troll. Like, Tim Pool's a liberal. Like, he's a progressive. So, and that's what, like, the travesty of Brian Stelter and Oliver Darcy, who used to work for alternative media at The Blaze and the Daily Caller. What a disappointment that guy is. And he used to talk about freedom of speech all the time in glowing terms, but the thing is, journalists really want licensed journalists because they want to control who has a voice, because journalists don't want to have to compete with you and me for the attention of the listener. Like, the people that are listening to this right now are paying attention to us and not them, and they're mad about it.
Yeah.
And then people are taking ad dollars from their networks and their newspapers, and they're giving it to networks that we're on and paying dollars for the attention of our people. So they're mad about the reality of new media stripping traditional media of its revenue and its attention. And so the New York Times will do everything in its power to put pressure on Twitter, and CNN will do everything they can to pressure Facebook to get rid of people like you, me, Alex Jones, Joe Rogan, because they don't want to have to compete. Mm-hmm. And Jon Stewart really nailed it in that the media has just exposed itself as another identity group that is just arguing for relevancy. They aren't the media that they claim to be. They're not the guardians of truth. They're all just full of themselves. And so it's not that all journalism, like, I hate the people who are like, you just posted something from the New York Times. Wow, I won't believe that. Like, there is great journalism that comes from newspapers. The Indianapolis Star here in town, like, you would never know about Larry Nassar and USA Gymnastics if it weren't for their journalism. Yeah. Wow. We had a Flint water crisis basically in a town called Franklin. You wouldn't know that if it weren't for local television news and good reporting. Like, stuff like that is important. But at the end of the day, when you try to use your position to beat competitors, when CNN has an entire hour every Sunday dedicated to beating up Fox News, it's like, you're not doing journalism. You're doing advocacy. You're doing advertising for your own product, and that's not journalism. So I look at what's going on, and I just can't believe that grown adults think that they know what I ought to be exposed to or not exposed to. No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and you see the likes of, especially with the latest example with CNN and reporting on BuzzFeed articles. Like, this is the world that we live in, where the company that is most known for their top 10 lists is getting releasing articles from anonymous sources, and it's getting blasted out on the likes of MSNBC and CNN. And it's just these unbelievable stories where, of course, I'm talking about the Michael Cohen piece where BuzzFeed reported that Michael Cohen was told by Donald Trump to lie to Congress, and that ended up being which is something we all, if you followed the story, you knew that was out there and that it hadn't been corroborated, and they couldn't even corroborate. Like, it used to be that you would not report something unless you had two sources. So just because the New York Times reported something, you, as the Washington Post, would need two sources of your own to verify before you'd put it in your newspaper. Well, now the reporting is BuzzFeed is saying, explosive new report is saying, now we've not verified this, but they're saying, and they repeat it over and over and over. It's such a cop-out. That's called propaganda. That's not journalism. Yeah. It's such a cop-out to be able to say, and they use that as a crutch to be like, well, it was reported that, or it was said that, and that way their tracks are covered, but they still are able to broadcast that out to the masses. And most people are not going to see any revisions. You see it with the likes of
the Covington High School kids. You see all these different things where they broadcast the original story, and CNN, I believe, took like 2 weeks to revise the original story that they had broadcast on these kids. And by then, it was very obvious what the real story was.
Right.
But the majority of the people who are reading that article are not going to see the revisions 2 weeks later.
No. You realize how easy it is to create news if you're on the left. Like this guy, the Phillips guy, the Native American, is an agitator, a professional agitator in the mold of Saul Alinsky.
He's had a history of doing it, yeah,
and has the networks to get himself in the news and get himself on the news by 5 p.m., whereas the kids take 2 days before they can get a statement out. You know, I mean, it just like our eyes are open. We see the BS that it is. We see what it's about. And like I am a more conservative leaning person. I'm a libertarian. I vote for all three parties. You know, honestly, every single election. I'm a fairly independent minded person, but there's just no doubt that Republicans. You know, if the Republicans do something bad, the headline is Republicans do something bad. And if a Democrat does something bad, the headline is Republicans pounce on Democrat who may have done something wrong. Like, there's just it's irrefutable at this point, and it's so insane that like that the journalists and liberals even try to refute that there is bias in the media because it's so irrefutable at this point.
Yeah, it is really ridiculous. And I mean, I do have some friends in the left that always seem to jump on Fox News, and rightly so. I mean, Fox News there is no doubt that they are very heavily biased, but they are known for their bias on the right. And they actually, they have said that they are a biased news source. You know, that's why they took out Fair and Balanced on Fox News. And so, but you have the likes of CNN, which pretends to be a balanced news source right in the middle when they are obviously not. They're just misleading the public, but they can't just admit that they are a left-leaning news source. So it's just like, it's so frustrating to see these major news outlets do this.
Just admit it. Like, you know, we have the newspapers here in Indiana, the Corden Democrat, the Rushville Republican.
Yes.
These are named that for a reason, because you used to have 3 or 4 newspapers even in a small town. Like, you know, New Harmony, Indiana had 1,000 people and it had 3 newspapers in the late 1800s. You know, in Indianapolis, you had 3 newspapers up until the 50s. What is happening now is what has always happened. It is that people of a certain worldview or vision of the world produce media for their people, and they tell their version of the story, and you have to read, you know, just go read National Review, read Vox, read Reason Magazine, read the New York Times, and then maybe, you know, go read Zero Hedge for your more conspiratorial side, and you're good. Like, you kind of get the news from a balanced perspective. That's all that's really asked of you. But the idea that CNN wants you to only watch them because they are unbiased is ludicrous. Like, it's just not. They are in New York City. They are run by a guy who used to run NBC. Zucker created, you know, the Thursday night lineup of Seinfeld. Like, the guy's been in Hollywood forever.
Yeah.
You know, he enjoys going to parties and being significant. You know, the venerated Ben Bradley, the editor of the New York Times, was best friends with Jack Kennedy.
Right.
You know, when he was working at Newsweek or Time. Like, so the idea that we have some sort of that Walter Cronkite wasn't coming from a decided worldview is just ludicrous. Like, he was coming from the worldview of the Council on Foreign Relations crowd, and you all just bought it because you didn't have access to other information. And then, you know, people just couldn't stand when National Review or Fox News or other worldviews started to creep in, and they really can't stand it now that people like me have a voice that I have on any given day the reach of an afternoon on CNN.
Yeah, like, no, it's unbelievable.
Small potatoes.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right, and that's why I said podcasts like yours is so important to the to the political spectrum, whereas the likes of CNN and even Fox News, I mean, is only reaching a limited amount of people. And more people are seeking out these elements. But since we're on the topic of crazy news stories and crazy news outlets, I did want to hit on this because we are getting close to the end of the episode here. I did want to hit on this this crazy news story that I found. So in Germany, a family pug was seized and sold on eBay to cover unpaid debts. So let me just read a little bit of this article from NPR here. So city workers in Germany have seized a family pedigreed pet pug and sold the animal on eBay to cover the debts of the owners, including an unpaid dog tax. It says the spokesman from the city of Alin told NPR in an email that the seizure of the valuable pet was legally permissible because of the open claims by the city's treasury office. However, he acknowledged that the method used to sell the dog might be open to criticism. Obtaining, they sold it on eBay. Obtaining the proceeds of the sale through the private eBay account was a very questionable decision by the enforcement officer. He added that the city was undertaking an internal investigation. I know you're I just saw your cat just a few minutes ago walk by. I know you're a pet person. What would you do if the U.S. government took your cat and sold it to cover your debts to the government?
Well, you just heard my cat tried to destroy AirPods, so you'd give her back. Because this Mittens is the most destructive animal I've ever been around.
She probably made more trouble than she's worth.
Like, pugs are God's little mistake. I don't know how they happened, and they have I don't know what they're worth, but not much. And so it's sort of like when you're really broke, in your early 20s, or maybe after your divorce, and you go to the pawn shop and you really need $200 and they offer you $50. Like, I feel like that's what you'd get with a pug. Like, you'd think, well, this guy owes $2,000, so we're going to take his pug. And then they're like, well, I'll give you $75.
Yeah, this was a pedigree pug. I mean, this was a very...
No such thing. No.
Yeah. Well, the thing is...
That's a pedigree pug.
Yeah, just sitting there struggling to survive while sitting still. And I mean, this is a pedigree pug that the owner had to pay for several surgeries for this dog, exceeding $2,000. So the owner is actually getting with the city officials that took her dog and sold it, and is wanting to be reimbursed with the surgeries she had to pay for this dog. So not only was it a pedigree pug, but she had to spend another $2,000 on the surgeries for the pedigree pug.
You this is just the reality, is that you don't own your home, you don't own anything in it. Like, I had a friend who was in an incident last night where he got into an argument with a manager at a gas station, and a cop watched it, and he was very calm, but the manager was screaming, and then he almost went to jail because he didn't want to show his ID to the cop. And the cop says, well, I'm not letting you leave until you show me your ID. And he goes, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not showing you. And the police officer said, well, then you're not leaving. And he goes,
wow.
There's no reason for you to keep me. I committed no crime.
Yeah.
I had a disagreement with someone. I'm leaving after they've asked me to leave. There was no physical violence. I don't need to show you ID. Well, then I'll run your plates. Okay, run my plates, but I'm not going to show you my ID because I did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no magical power that comes with that man wearing that blue uniform and putting on a badge. There's no reason for him to have some extra power where he gets to just detain a citizen for no reason because he doesn't like his tone.
Yeah.
And so the reality is that government takes and takes and takes and takes and takes. And the more you let it, and the more you make excuses for the man in the magical blue uniform who, oh, well, guess what? They confiscate guns. Guess what? They put you in jail when you don't do what the government wants. I'm not anti-police, but I am anti-authority that has been granted to the police. And I'm anti-government authority because at the end of the day, the reality of government is that it is different than the private sector.
No, Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct, because you see the power of the police force, and you kind of hinted on this a little bit before, because the power of the police force is increasing. You see these SWAT teams and these local police departments increasing in their equipment that they're receiving. But listen.
The big differentiator is government force. You because you can't persuade to have your ideas enacted by society. Like gay rights, for instance, you didn't need the government to do anything on gay rights. Society, culture changed, and then the government changed with it. It is persuasion, where people, through empathy, said, you know what, my gay neighbor's not that bad. Like, if he wants to live his life in a different way than I might live my life, then the government should not have any interference in that. Like, that's how that worked. Like, the government if you don't believe in government force, don't pay your parking tickets.
Yeah.
Don't pay your taxes. What happens at the end of that train?
Well, they throw you in a cage.
You are either bankrupt or there is a gun pointed at your head. Like, that is the difference, and that is why people like to use government as the solution, because government forces people to act instead of having to take the extra step of trying to persuade people, or just accepting that people are different than you and they're going to live a different life, and you don't need to understand what it's like to live this way or that way, or you don't need to, force other people to live in the way that you think you ought to live. Like, just surround yourself with 100 people that think like you do, and you'll be fine. You know, like, let them go have their compound of polyamorous, dope-smoking hippies, and then you all can go just pray by the river and, like, not have extramarital sex. Like, you don't. And then maybe you'll end up becoming friends because they make a product that your community needs. Like, that's how this works. And what we have gotten, because we've gotten too far ahead of ourselves with government force, is that one community doesn't want to persuade, and so they use government force. And then at the end of the day, everybody's wrestling for the gun. Yeah. And so it creates enemies where friends should exist.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Well, Chris, I'll tell you what, this has been a lot of fun. We're running out of time here. For those listening, check out the We Are Libertarians podcast. It's a great source of information if you are interested in the libertarian philosophy. It's just a bunch of guys getting together. They're not pushing an ideology. They're just discussing the issues in a very laid-back manner. I really enjoy listening to the show. Chris, thank you again so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time to come out.
Yeah, absolutely. I had fun. It was great to meet you.
It was great to meet you as well. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of Freedom Strips. Later.